Hello again. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about my use of graphic notation. In part one we took a look at some of my earlier pieces, and now we're going to look at some of my more recent ones. Most of my pieces are written using standard notation, which has been the norm for the last 600 years or so. However, in the 20th century, as composers started using more noise sounds and eventually electronics in their music, new ways of notating these sounds were developed. It symbolizes music in one of two ways, either as a representation of the sounds produced or as a guide to the actions to be performed to make the music. There are a number of piano sketches called the Hyades Sketches. The Hyades is a cluster of stars in the constellation of Taurus that have a number of solo piano pieces that use graphic notation. But most of that piece is still in sketches. It has to be worked out. They may not all be solo piano pieces. Now this next piece is another Buck Moore-inspired piece. It started as a soundtrack that I wrote for Buck back in 2004 for a film he did called Scarehouse. And it was for large orchestra, and much of the score was written in graphic notation. Now at the time I was working on that piece, I knew that I wanted to incorporate some of these sketches into a larger piece. And this is one of those pieces that started off with a really rough graphic sketch, which eventually got turned into notes, but the end result was a graphic score as well. And I've had to spend years studying how to write this piece and studying microtonality and a few other things to be able to finish this darn thing. Most graphic scores will come with a legend at the beginning of the piece to show you what the symbols mean and how to interpret them. In the last few years, I've started using that kind of notation for strings, and one of the ways I use graphic notation here is that I give the rhythms and the dynamics that the piece is going to be performed with, but I don't give the actual pitches. So the players have to make up the pitches, and every performance is going to be different depending on what they play. Some of the different kinds of notation, well, it depends on the piece. The Vega Sketches is one of the things I'm working on at the moment, and I've recorded a few tracks following a really loose kind of graphic notation. And I'm working on a piece called Studies in Collective Improvisation for String Quartet. And there are a whole bunch of sketches for that use various kinds of notation, up a minor third, down a second, but you don't tell them what the original pitch is supposed to be. So there is some line and contour to the piece, but again, every performance is going to be different. And this is the work that I'm working on recently. I kind of put off for the last year. I got to get back to. I really like. It's a piece for male vocal choir, which was originally called Decapita, which is another star in Ursa Minor, but I may change it to Kochab. I like that name better, which is yet another star in the constellation of Ursa Minor. This incorporates different vocal sounds and clapping and swishing of hands and stuff like that. Now, one of the problems with these kind of notations is that if you have an idea in your head how the sound is supposed to go and then you write it down, when you go back and perform the piece, are you reading the notation, or are you just playing what you remember how it's supposed to go? And with this particular piece, I think that I'm going to have to renotate this with a more exact Stockhausen type notation, because I am actually singing particular pitches. It's not completely random, even though the score itself asks for you to do it randomly. So there's a little look at a few of my scores and a few of my pieces and some of the ways that I use graphic notation. Hope you found that interesting. See you later.